Welcome to the Sewing Machine Repair Guy. Come learn with me. Today we have a Singer 14U64A Serger. It was brought in for some service, good cleaning, and some adjustments. I'm going to show you today some tips and tricks on how to make sergers a little bit easier to adjust. Hopefully we'll learn that they aren't too difficult to work on as well. This one, as we look around, pardon my shaky and out of focus camera, but you'll see that this thing has been well loved. It's got a lot of dirt, some buildup of grease that's holding the dirt in there, a lot of fibers from fabric that's been through it. Every time you cut, you'll notice that there's a lot of fabric fiber that gets thrown throughout this machine. Coming around the side here, you can see the large presser foot on a serger. It's got 2 needles, and then you've got 4 adjustments for tension. This is a 2 needle 4-thread machine. A little bit later on we'll look at how to master setting your tensions on a serger. It's really not that difficult once you get into it. But you can see this thing has a lot of dirt. It's been well loved over the years. So here we are taking it apart. So this is the first time I've taken this one apart, or this type of serger, and so you're learning right along with me because I've never done this before. Now we can see the motor. It's a typical sewing machine motor that's in most modern machines, the same exact motor, or at least the same form factor. And I'm just trying to figure out how to get these parts off of here. Yeah, you can see the inside's also pretty dirty. One thing you can see is that there's a felt line in the back that goes around to the different bearings. You'll see it again as we pan up. That felt wick really is what it is for lubrication, so that should be wet with oil, and it's very dry. Belt on this one looks good. I don't intend on replacing it. And here we go with some more disassembly, taking the bottom off of it, and found some critters in there. That's kind of nasty. So typically what I do with these is I'll get my vacuum and I'll use my brushes. I'll have a link to the brushes in the description. They're just Amazon brushes. Any sort of nylon brush will work just fine. And there's different sizes. This is the one I just picked up to use for this machine. Typically you'll try and work from top to bottom and use the vacuum to get in there, and then you move it around and make sure that you can get all the various areas and everything, because this thing is covered in dust and bugs and a lot of fiber from the fabric. It is a pretty dirty machine. Definitely want to get underneath the needle plate anytime you work on a machine. That's where a lot of stuff will build up. I do use compressed air, so there's a lot of people who don't like that. I've found that it works well for me. And you know, people say you're going to push the dirt further in. Well, I'm as far into this machine as you can get, so I will find the dirt. It just helps to get that last little bit out that the vacuum didn't get in the brush. You want to make sure you get the tensioners really well. That's where some thread buildup will be, and if your tension's not right, and we'll find this out later, if your tension's not right, then this machine will not work. I use isopropyl alcohol for cleaning. That helps get a lot of the grease off and any of the dust and bug guts that are in there. So that's a spray bottle that used to have hair stuff in it, but now it's isopropyl alcohol. And I just go through and do all the pieces. And this is my normal cleaning process. I take the machine apart, clean all the parts, and then put it all back together before I do any sort of adjusting or working. The only time I wouldn't do that typically is if there's something pretty obvious that's broken, and I might jump in to fix that right away. But typically I like to clean it first, especially if it's a pretty dirty machine. You'll notice I'm using some rags. I like to wear gloves when I use alcohol just because it dries out your skin. And I think it's 94%. It's the best I can get at Walmart. Okay, so we got the machine clean. The next step is going to be the lubrication. That's why I have the Tri-Flow over there, and I'll put a link to that too. So you want this felt pad to be wet. It needs to be saturated. And then I also go down the wick, down to the bearings. And I'm also going to get the bearings. Anything that moves against another surface gets a few drops. And work it in really well. Yeah, put the needles in my little safety needle container. Put some new needles in. Getting close to rock and roll time. Sergers are really impressive machinery. I love to see how everything works with each other to make a perfect stitch. One thing when you're screwing plastic together is don't go too tight. So you want to make sure that if this thing heats up or cools off or anything, the expansion contraction of that plastic, you don't want it to start cracking. So you never tighten these screws very tight. Sometimes I'll even tighten it down and then back off a little bit just to make sure it's not going to crack. A lot of times when I go into machines that have been looked at before, I'll see cracks and even some broken pieces just because the screws were, a lot of people like to use drills or electric screw guns, and that'll be the death of your plastic when you do that. And just too tight. Alright, so you'll notice here I've got 4 different colors of threads, and they actually match the color that's on the tensioners, and that is amazing how much that will help you when you're setting your tensions, because you can see right away which thread it is that's either too tight or too loose. That's kind of that tip or trick that I was going to tell you about, is that those different colored threads make a huge difference when you're adjusting a machine. One thing to keep in mind is the needles both should be about the same and somewhere in the middle of the range when you set your tensions, and then the other two you just got to kind of play with to make the stitch look the way you want it to look, and then we'll look at some of that a little bit later. I still have not done any adjustments. So far we've just cleaned the machine and lubricated it. And the next part is going to be to sew and see what kind of adjustments need to be made. It should by hand start making knots. So what you should see right now is that red thread should go through the blue and the green, and it's only going through the one right now. So my upper looper on the red is not making it all the way across to catch the blue thread. And that's something that's much easier to see when you have different colors of thread. And you can look in there, and I'm looking at the looper now to see how far over it's going. And now I'm going to adjust that looper. And this is a typical problem you'll see with sergers, is that one of the loopers is not making it all the way or has shifted. So I just adjusted the looper. Now we're going to try it and see. And you'll notice that I just figured out that my thread was not correct. So here we go. We're going to run it through. Alright, there is something wrong with our tension. Look at that green thread. It's looping on the top and the bottom. So my green thread was not tensioned correctly. It's way too loose. See all those little loops. And now I'm looking at it, it's green, and there's something wrong. It is not going through that place. Then I realized that I have to redo the whole thing because it's supposed to go through holes there in the back, and I missed that. So here we are. Fixed my problem. Now we are properly routed through the thread. They don't all come with the instruction manuals. Alright, when we look at this, what did you want to see? One side has the U's, so it looks like a U on the red. You got two nice stitches going across the U's, and then on the back you have the Y's. And the Y's look very tight, everything looks really good. The top of the Y should be right there at the top of the thread, the fabric too, on the edge. And the top of the U should also be along the edge. If those are all correct, then your tensions are set perfectly. This machine magically had the tensions just right. You know, when it's threaded correctly. So I went through and did a couple more just to see how it looks. And then when I'm happy with it, then I put the customer's thread back in. So the customer had 3 white threads and a blue thread. I'm not sure why, but you know what? Customer does what the customer does. We're coming towards the end of the video. I really hope that you learned something, because I did. I learned a lot about this serger and how to fix it. I'm going through right now doing the final test runs with the customer's fabric, customer's thread, making sure we have a good stitch, the U's and the Y's. And if we're happy with that, we stick it in there and we say thank you and we say please subscribe so you get notified for the next video. Thanks for watching and thanks for learning with me.